welcome. Glad you guys are here tonight. We are in week 3 of our series called what? Thicker than water. What's thicker than water? Blood. So we're talking about what? Not blood. Family. Yes. All right. So let's just maybe start with an obvious statement. All right. Things change. Yes. Things change. You are not the same person you were a year ago. Hopefully, right? Hopefully you've matured. It's like matured since then, right? Did anybody say mature, or do you say mature? I say it like mature. Hopefully you have matured over the last year, and you're not the same person that you were a year ago. You've probably evolved in your taste in music since like middle school. Anybody? Or do you just like the same bands? Do you listen to bands, or do you listen to artists? Artists, okay. Well, what'd you say? Are you talking about a specific artist, and I just missed it? Switchfoot. See, that's a real band right there. Thank you very much. Switchfoot's really good. That's my favorite band, for those of you who don't know. And maybe you've also grown in your sense of style. Unless you're me and you've worn like the same kind of clothes for like the last 10 years just because it works for you, right? And also, I don't like spending money on things like clothes, right? Sure, it's a treat once in a while, but if I don't have to, I'll save that money. But you guys, as growing individuals, hopefully that you are updating your clothing attire. Otherwise, you'll be like my 6-year-old son. If he tries to wear his brother's clothes that's like a year and a half behind him, then he'll like have really small clothes and it won't work right. So you grow, you change. This is a good thing. It's a good part of life. Change can be good, change can be bad. How many of you are like, I love change. Let's mix it up. I don't like doing the same thing every day. How many of you are like, nope, give me the same. I want to know exactly what to expect at all times. Don't you dare surprise me. Okay. All right. So we got more of those people here tonight. I would say I'm similar to that. But sometimes things change and they're expected, like, growing out of clothes, all that kind of good stuff. Moving buildings from the middle school to the high school, changing classrooms each year. Those things are to be expected. But what about unexpected change, right? Change where you didn't see it coming, you didn't have time to prepare, you weren't warned, you were just suddenly change was thrust upon you and you didn't like it. Unexpected changes have a way of disrupting our lives. And here's the thing, most of us can handle even unexpected change when the core things that are important to us don't change, when they stay the same. Things like family. When you go through changes, then hopefully you got like a safe base where you can like, okay, if everything else changes but I still have these people, I'm good, right? But what happens? Right? What happens when even that doesn't happen? When even things within your family change and it's out of your control? Because I think all of us would agree family should be the constant. Whether you have a family that is reliable and that you can trust and you love your family, or you have a family that you're like, yeah, can I get a different family, please? Regardless of what kind of family you come from, you probably have this idea that families should be constant. They should be the things that, are like an anchor in your life that don't change a lot. But what happens when they're not that constant? When change happens in a family, it can be much more difficult to deal with than just other menial changes in life, right? You'll change your friend groups. You'll change your tastes in music or movies or sense of humor. You'll grow and develop. But family should be a constant, and when it doesn't remain a constant, when things like parents split up, or you lose a parent, or something tragic happens, or everything is just maybe there's a big secret that gets let out, and that changes the whole dynamic of your family, and what was your anchor, your safe place, has unexpectedly changed out of your control. And what once felt like your constant, your safe place, no longer is that. What do you cling to? And how do you navigate through that? Right? That's a legitimate question. How do you navigate through unexpected changes that nobody should be expected to deal with, but you're having to? Family changes are tough. They can be hard to deal with. But no matter what our experience is with change, something about it happening in our families makes it all the more difficult. But the questions we want to we want to figure out are, how do we get better at handling it? How do we navigate through those family changes without becoming bitter and cynical? Right? That's my temptation. Honestly, when things happen, the temptation in my brain is to just automatically go cynical and bitter, right? And so I've got to kind of like work on that. And so, but that's a good question. How can we be better prepared for it? Maybe if you haven't gone through any radical changes in your life, how can you prepare yourself in the event that something crazy might happen? Legitimate questions. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. When we look through the Bible, we often read through the New Testament. We read through, especially as we're Christians. We're not like in ancient Israel following the God of Israel. We're post-resurrection. We have the Holy Spirit living inside us. So we live under the new covenant, not the old covenant, which means, like, and Paul talks in a lot of his letters about how we are now, like, all those of the same faith of Abraham are the church, the family of God. It's no longer just for the Israelites. And so when we read in church and talk about it, we often go to the New Testament. We talk through the Gospels. We talk maybe through the book of Acts. We talk through some of the letters from some of the apostles. But even earlier in the Bible, in the Old Testament, it's good to know the history. It's good to know, like, there is still wisdom to be found in the Old Covenant. And where we're going to be looking today, we're going to find, I think it's pretty relevant for today. So Solomon was the son of King David. He was the third king of Israel. He was known to be one of the wisest men who ever lived. And this is what he says in Ecclesiastes 3, 1 through 8. So just strap in here. It's a little bit of a longer verse than I usually read, but hang in with me. There's a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to uproot. A time to kill, and a time to heal. A time to tear down, and a time to build. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones, and a time to gather them. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search, and a time to give up. A time to keep, and a time to throw away. A time to tear, and a time to mend. A time to be silent, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time for war, and a time for peace. There's a lot of times in that passage. What's the point? Well, there's a point and a reason and a time for everything under the heavens. In other words, change is inevitable, which this is a life truth that you and I are already familiar with. Change is going to happen at some point. That's what he's letting us know, that everything will change at some point or another. But the truth is that when we know things will change, both in our families and in the world around us, we can be prepared to deal with it because there's a time for everything, right? Hey, knowing that there's a time for everything helps us a little bit mentally to be prepared for when change happens, right? Instead of fighting change and pretending like things will always stay the same, we can open our hands and give it control. I'll never forget when I was younger, probably in college, the first time I heard this analogy. I've heard it from several people. But the first time I heard it, it was like earth-shattering for me. I remember someone explaining like God's will, God's plans, and our need to control things. Any control freaks in here besides me? Right? You like to I see you, Heather. We like to have control over everything. Some might say we have the illusion of control, but none of us really have control. Have you heard that before? But when we try to hang on to things, maybe we got something great, and we don't want to miss it. We don't want to lose out on it. So we try to hold on to what we have, what's good. And here's the thing: sometimes God blesses us with good things that we want to hold on to, and that's okay. But what happens when God has something better? What if our minds can't perceive of the better, of the great that God has in store for us because we're too attached to the good? Well, when we hold our hands fisted, not literally, but like think figuratively with me, when we hold on so tightly to what we have, to our control of things, sure, you can maybe hold on to it a little longer than you would have otherwise. But also, God can't take it and give you something better. When we open our hands to God and we live as if He really does have control. I like this idea when we're worshiping, we have our hands lifted high. It's like, God, my life is yours. He can take and He can put back. He can take what you're afraid to lose because it's good, and he can give you something even greater that you never expected. There's a time for everything. If we live our lives open-handed, prepared for change, because we know that it's inevitable, we'll have a much easier time at it. Just another quick passage I want to point you to. A few hundred years later, after Solomon wrote that, there was a time where the Israelites, the people of God, they continue. If you read the Old Testament, it's this cycle, right? The cycle where they're saved, and then they sin, and then God brings judgment on them, and then they're sorry, and then they're saved again, and then they sin, and it's just this cycle that goes on again and again and again. All throughout the Old Testament, you just read it, and you see this repeated over and over again. So there's a period in history where God's people had turned from him again, started going by their own ways, and rejecting God's command, God's laws for their lives. And this results in God allowing their enemies to overtake them. And so the Babylonians come in, they kidnap the young men, like Daniel, take them into captivity to Babylon, and train them to be Babylonian soldiers, to work for the Babylonian Empire. And they're displaced from their home. Talk about family change. These people were ripped from their families, they were ripped from their homeland, all these kinds of things. They were eventually restored back to that, and the prophets talk about that. But in a point of uncertainty, in a point where everything they knew had been stripped away from them, when God was enacting church discipline in the Old Testament sort of way, he still does it with love, with the intention of always bringing them back. It was for a period of time. It wasn't forever. And this is what the prophet Isaiah is saying to God's people in the midst of this tough time. He says, when you pass through the waters, and he's speaking for God, I will be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. It reminds me of Daniel in captivity and his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they get thrown into the fiery furnace. Literally, the Babylonians were known for doing this, for throwing people that they didn't like or that were insubordinate into the fiery furnace. Right? And Isaiah is saying, this is not the end. Hold on. I know it seems rough right now, but God still has a plan, and he has your best interest in mind. If you cling to him, you will not be burned. He will be with you in the fire, and it won't be the end of your story. Imagine the comfort that brought to God's people in the midst of such uncertainty. While we don't live in that kind of world today, the same God who ruled over the Israelites then rules over us today. In fact, he's one-upped his love by 100 times by sending himself in the form of Jesus to come and show us how much he really loved us. So that we know that even though things will change, even though terrible change might happen to even the closest parts of our lives, he will not let it sweep us away. If we cling to him, he is our anchor, and he will hold us steadfast. In every single moment and season of change, including family change, God will be with us. Think about it this way. Any of you guys ever been rock climbing? Anybody? Like, Camp Allendale has rock climbing, but then there's like real rock climbing, where you're like on the side of a mountain or on a rock, and you have to use these things. What are these? Clips. Specifically, carabiners, yeah? You guys ever use these for more than a keychain? Like this, I mean, I use it for a keychain. I literally took it off my keychain for this illustration. But carabiners, like they hold us to the wall. It's got a functional purpose for the rock climbing, right? According to a climbing website, locking carabiners manage all the tasks safely and ease your mind in dangerous situations, since you know that your rope and yourself are securely attached to the rock. In other words, you can be a little risky. You can jump to somewhere you may not reach, and if you fall, well, the carabiners got you. It's all right. You might get beat up. You might get bruised because rocks are hard, and they'll scrape you, and you'll get cuts, and your hands will dry out. But the carabiners will be safe. They'll keep you attached. And in the same way, God is always with us. He's always there, locked in with us through every single change that comes our way, including family change. When we fall, when we get scraped up, we're still hold fast him. And he's not going to let us get swept away. He has got a steadfast love that is locked on to us. And he is a God who never changes. He's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So we can start by focusing our own mindset, thinking, attitude, and perspective. We can change the way that we look at change. Right? Rather than something to be earth-shattering and take us out of our faith, we can see it as something that has some scrapes and bruises along the way, but it's temporary. In this world we'll have trouble, but take heart. He has overcome the world. And he is held fast to us. Or more accurately, we are held fast to him. When your family goes through rough waters, your mindset can see you through. Knowing in advance that he's got you will help hold you steadfast when you encounter rough waters. Here's a few things to help you work on it. One, understand that change will inevitably happen. I get this. You get this. This is just life history, the life lessons that you probably had to learn from an early age. Change is natural. It happens. So expect it. In fact, expect the unexpected. Because life is a roller coaster sometimes. Understand that change will happen. There's a time for everything, and there's no quick answer or easy answer for most of it. Secondly, know that God is with you. In the same way that Isaiah wrote to the Israelites that whether they pass through the waters or walk through the fire, God will be with us. In the same way, Jesus has promised us that he will always be with us to the very end of the age. And so our hope is fully in him and not anything else that goes on around us. So know that God is with you. If your faith is in your circumstances, your faith will crumble pretty quickly when your circumstances change. But if your faith is in the one who holds all circumstances, then you have nothing to worry about because he's got it all in his hands. 3, trust that God can use the change to change you. Oftentimes when we're resistant to change, we're resistant to the work God is trying to do in us. By trying to hold on to what was, sometimes we prevent God or keep him at arm's distance when he tries to really nurture the soil in our own hearts, to grow something better in our lives. So trust that God can use the change to change you. Now, without question, change is difficult. As most of you in the room have already confessed, you don't like change. And I'm with you there. It's difficult. When there's a new season, new house, new town, new school, new family member, new normal, it's never easy, especially when it comes to family. But we have a God who will never let us go. As we pass through everything that this world will throw at us, we know that we can put our faith in him. He's got a held steadfast in him. So I encourage you guys this week, as you get back to school, back to your daily rhythms, back to your routines, remember we serve a God of love and a God who will never let you go. So let me pray. You'll go to your small groups and we'll be done for the week.